How much of your own identity is carved into the handle of a tool you have held for 20 years? Can a machine ever replicate the silent conversation between a human palm and the stubborn grain of American white oak? Is the progress of a nation measured by the speed of its production, or by the dignity of the hands that build it? What happens to the soul of a creator when his masterpiece is reduced to a standardized component? Do you truly believe that the comfort of your modern home was born from anything other than the systematic exhaustion of men who saw the world through a cloud of sawdust? You walk into the year 1840, stepping off a muddy Philadelphia street and into the dim, amber-lit sanctuary of a master carpenter's workshop. The air here is not just oxygen, it is a thick, sweet suspension of cedar shavings, beeswax, and the metallic tang of sharpened carbon steel. You feel the temperature drop as you move away from the street's humid chaos into this cathedral of manual precision. Here, time is not measured by a ticking clock, but by the rhythmic, physical resistance of wood against blade. You run your fingers over a workbench scarred by decades of labor, feeling the deep gouges where a chisel slipped or where a heavy mallet landed. Your ears adjust to the symphony of the pre-industrial era, the long, curling whistle of a hand plane shearing a translucent ribbon of pine, the sharp, authoritative bite of a saw, and the melodic thud of joinery being driven home. There is a profound stability in this environment. You observe the master craftsman, a man whose hands are a topographical map of calluses and scars, moving with a deliberate, unhurried economy of motion. Every cut he makes is an exercise in structural honesty. He understands the tension of the timber, the way it breathes with the seasons, and the exact angle required to ensure a roof beam holds for a century. In this space, you are an observer of a dying autonomy. The craftsman is the designer, the engineer, and the executor. His reputation is his only currency, but as you stand there, a new sound begins to bleed through the walls from the factory district across the river. It is a low, guttural thrum that vibrates in your chest, the relentless, shivering heartbeat of the steam engine. Suddenly, the silence of the workshop feels fragile, like a glass bell about to shatter. You notice a tremor in the water bucket near the door. The floorboards beneath your boots hum with a mechanical frequency that is alien to the organic pulse of the forest. This is the rupture. The American landscape is shifting from the individual to the aggregate. The mastery you see before you, which took a lifetime to cultivate, is being challenged by a piston that never tires and a blade that never blunts. You watch the master look at his hands, then at the window, sensing that the very definition of a maker is being rewritten by coal and iron. The transition is not merely technological, it is visceral. The scent of wood is being overtaken by the acrid, oily stench of grease and burning anthracite. The light, once filtered softly through small glass panes, is now being replaced by the harsh, flickering glare of industrial gas lamps. You feel the pace of the room accelerate. There is a new pressure in the air, a demand for volume over value, for uniformity over uniqueness. The craftsman's tools, once extensions of his own nerves, now seem like relics of a slower, more contemplative world. The stability of the guild is fracturing under the weight of the assembly line. You see the first signs of this erosion in the way the younger apprentices look toward the factories, lured by the promise of steady wages and the terrifying efficiency of the new world. The risk is no longer just a physical injury from a slipped blade. It is the risk of obsolescence. You realize that the very walls of this shop are a thin membrane between two eras of human existence. The wood under your hand feels colder now, less like a living thing and more like a raw material waiting to be processed. This is the moment where the intimate connection between creator and creation begins to be severe. The sensory richness of the artisanal life is being compressed into the gray, repetitive density of the industrial machine. You are witnessing the birth of the modern consumer world, built upon the ruins of the individual spirit. The textures of the past are smoothing out, becoming slick and anonymous. As you stand in the center of this transformation, you begin to understand that the price of progress is often paid in the currency of human touch. The anvil is quiet, but the factory whistle is screaming, signaling a shift that will redefine the American family, the American city, and the very marrow of the American dream. You are caught in the splintered edge of history, where the old world is being planned away to make room for the new, and the shavings are falling like snow around your feet. The weight of this realization is heavy, a physical density that settles in your lungs alongside the dust of 1,000 fallen oaks. You see the master craftsman turn away from the window, his face a mask of weary defiance, and you know that the world he built is already ghost-like, a memory being overwritten by the relentless ink of the industrial age. This is the threshold of the machine, the point where the hand yields to the gear and the individual yields to the mass. It is a moment of profound loss cloaked in the language of advancement, a quiet tragedy played out in the smell of pine and the sound of steam. As the light fades from the workshop, you feel the urgency of the new era pressing against the door, demanding entry. The transformation is inevitable, and the consequences will ripple through the centuries to come. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because the history we uncover here is the only map we have to understand the structures that still define our lives today, and you won't want to miss the revelations waiting in the shadows of the next chapter. You leave the quiet, cedar-scented sanctuary of the Master's Workshop and step directly into the roaring furnace of the mid-19th century American metropolis. The city does not greet you, it consumes you. You are now a small, organic pulse within the gargantuan metallic lungs of New York. The air here has lost its sweetness, replaced by a dense, suffocating soup of coal soot, horse manure, and the sharp, alkaline sting of fresh lime mortar. Your ears are assaulted by a cacophony that defies the human scale. The rhythmic, earth-shaking pile drivers plunging timber deep into the swampy bedrock, the frantic clatter of iron-rimmed wheels on uneven cobblestones, and the shrill, constant whistling of steam hoists. You look upward, and for the first time in human history, the sky is being partitioned into a grid of iron and pine. Scaffolding, thin and skeletal as a spider's web, clings to the rising brick facades that stretch higher than any tree you have ever seen. You see men, many of them former master carpenters, now reduced to housesmiths or framers, scurrying across narrow joists hundreds of feet above the mud. There is no net beneath them, only the hard, unforgiving reality of the industrial street. You feel the frantic pace of this construction in your own heartbeat. This is not the slow, seasonal growth of a village. This is a frantic, speculative fever. Buildings are being thrown up in weeks, not years. You notice the shift in the very texture of the wood being used. It is no longer seasoned for decades. It is green, sawn by massive steam-powered circular saws that leave rough, aggressive scars on the grain. You touch a newly installed doorframe in a rising brownstone and feel the splinters of stem. The craftsmanship is being sacrificed for the square foot. You follow a group of these builders as the sun sets, not to a quiet cottage, but into the dark, labyrinthine throat of a 5 points tenement. The transition from the soaring, optimistic heights of the construction site to the crushing horizontal density of the living quarters is a physical blow. You move through a narrow alleyway where the sun never reaches the ground, and the walls are damp with a permanent, greasy condensation. The smell here is a thick, stagnant layer of unwashed bodies, cabbage soup, and the metallic tang of overcrowded rooms. You enter a single room, perhaps 10 feet by 12, which serves as the entire universe for a family of 7. The furniture is sparse, often made of the very scraps of lumber the father brought home from the job site. You sit on a rough-hewn bench and feel the vibrations of the city through the floorboards. Above you, someone is coughing, a dry, persistent sound that echoes through the thin lath and plaster walls. Beside you, the carpenter's wife is sewing by the weak, flickering light of a tallow candle, her eyes strained and red. The contrast is staggering. During the day, these men build palaces of commerce and grand residences for the new merchant princes, using the finest mahogany and marble. At night, they return to a lightless box, where the air is recycled and the water is a luxury. You realize that the city is a machine that functions by separating the creator from the comfort of his creation. The stability of the old world has been replaced by this precarious, high-density existence. You feel the fragility of this life. A single fire, a single injury, or a single downturn in the timber market could erase this family's entire world. Yet there is a strange, desperate energy in this crowded darkness. You hear a dozen different languages drifting through the floorboards: German, Irish, Italian, all blending into the new American vernacular. The spatial reality of the tenement is the crucible of the industrial identity. You see the carpenter staring at his hands in the candlelight, his knuckles swollen from the cold and the repetitive stress of to hammer. He is no longer an artist. He is a producer of volume. He is a soldier in the army of the grid. The city is expanding outward and upward, driven by its sweat, yet it is being squeezed into smaller and smaller increments of space. You feel the heat of the room, the lack of ventilation, and the crushing weight of the thousands of people living directly above and below you. This is the industrial bargain. The grandeur of the skyline is paid for by the squalor of the street. You watch the carpenter's children sleeping on a pile of rags in the corner, and you wonder if they will ever know the smell of a forest that hasn't been turned into a ledger entry. The city is a magnificent, terrifying achievement of human will, but as you sit in the shadows of the tenement, you feel the profound cost of that ambition. The structures are rising, the profits are soaring, but the human spirit is being forced to adapt to a geometry that ignores its need for light and air. You are witnessing the birth of the modern urban struggle, where the environment is entirely man-made and entirely indifferent to the individual. The grid of the city is a cage as much as it is a map. As you look out the small, grime-streaked window at the silhouettes of the cranes against the moon, you realize that the most important construction happening here isn't made of brick or wood, but of a new, resilient social fabric born of shared hardship. The city is a masterpiece of contradiction, a place where you can build a cathedral in the morning and starve in a cellar at night. This paradox is the defining feature of the era. The iron is cold, the pine is rough, and the human heart is the only thing providing warmth in this mechanical landscape. It is a world of immense power and heartbreaking vulnerability, where every upward inch of progress is balanced by a downward pull of exhaustion. Leave a comment saying the city is a living machine, because the paradox of building a world you can't afford to live in is a story that echoes through every brick of our modern existence. This collective memory is what binds us to the men who hammered the first nails into the American dream. Even in the darkness of the tenement, the dream persists, flickering like a candle in a drafty room, refusing to be extinguished by the soot of the rising factories. You feel the weight of their labor in your own bones, a silent testament to the endurance of the human will in the face of the industrial storm. This is the reality of the grid, a map of ambition and an architecture of survival, where every beam of pine carries the silent history of a man who gave his strength to the city and received only a shadow in return. The night is long and the morning whistle will call them back to the heights, but for now there is only the heavy, crowded silence of the tenement, a space where the Industrial Revolution breathes in the dark, waiting for the next day's work to begin. You step back from the dizzying scaffolding of the rising city and cross the threshold into the domestic interior, where the Industrial Revolution reveals its most intimate and unforgiving ledger. The air here is no longer charged with the adrenaline of construction. It is heavy with the scent of boiled potatoes, damp wool, and the metallic tang of lye. You are in the realm of the hearth, but the hearth is no longer a symbol of pastoral peace. It is a biological processing unit, a site of constant invisible labor that keeps the industrial machine from collapsing into total exhaustion. You observe the carpenter's wife as she moves through a space that is less a home and more a workshop of survival. Her hands, although they have never held a professional adze or a jack plane, are just as calloused as her husband's. She is the quiet architect of the family's stability, navigating a daily geometry of scarcity. You watch her count the remaining copper coins on a scarred wooden table, a physical manifestation of the tension between the cost of bread and the fluctuating price of lumber. The volatility of the American market is not just a graph in a banker's office, it is the thinness of the soup in that iron pot. You feel the heat of the small stove, a cast-iron beast that demands constant attention, mirroring the relentless schedule of the factory whistle. The rhythm of the home is dictated by the needs of the worker who will return at dusk, broken and depleted. Every stitch she places in a torn work shirt, every pound of dough she kneads with aching shoulders, is a structural reinforcement of the industrial social order. Without this silent domestic engineering, the carpenter could not return to the heights of the skyscrapers. You see the ledger of their lives written in the physical degradation of their belongings. The blankets are thin, the ceramic bowls are chipped, and the light from the single window is obstructed by the soot of 1,000 chimneys. There is a profound contrast between the abundance of the materials the carpenter handles during the day, the vast shipments of white pine and virgin oak, and the meager scraps that define his own residence. You realize that in this era, the craftsman builds a world of luxury that he is structurally barred from inhabiting. The stability of the family unit is a fragile, high-stakes performance. You watch the wife manage the children with a discipline born of necessity. There is no room for the luxury of chaos in a tenement. The noise from the street, the brawls, the clatter, the desperate commerce, is a constant pressure against the door. You feel the humidity of the laundry drying indoors, a dampness that seeps into the bones and feeds the persistent cough you heard in the previous chapter. This is the biological cost of the industrial city. The risk is not just a fall from a beam, but the slow, corrosive erosion of health in a space that never truly dries or breathes. You observe the silent communication between the couple when the carpenter finally returns. There are no grand narratives of progress exchanged, only the weary assessment of physical capacity for the following day. The abundance of the market is a distant abstraction. The reality is the calorie. You see her plate his portion, always larger, always prioritized, not out of favoritism but as a cold calculation of caloric investment. He must be able to lift the beams tomorrow, or the ledger will turn red and the room will be lost. This domestic management is a form of craftsmanship in itself, a precise shaping of limited resources to prevent the total fracture of the household. The women of this era are the unsung surveyors of the industrial landscape, measuring out life in spoonfuls of flour and inches of candle wax. You feel the weight of this responsibility in the set of her jaw and the way she listens for the subtle changes in her children's breathing. As the night deepens, the home becomes a sanctuary of exhaustion. The ledger is closed for the day, but the debt to the industrial machine remains. You realize that the American family is being redesigned as a unit of production, stripped of its ornamental traditions and honed into a lean, functional engine of endurance. The contrast between the safety of the hearth and the risk of the street is narrowing, as the market forces penetrate even the most private moments. You see the carpenter's wife finally sit down, her body collapsing into the chair with a heaviness that matches her husband's. She is the glue that holds the splintered wood of their lives together. The Industrial Revolution is not just happening in the factories or on the construction sites, it is happening here, in the quiet desperation of the kitchen and the strategic management of a dwindling coal pile. The hearth is the heart of the machine, and it is beating with a frantic, weary pulse. You look at the cold ashes in the gratitude and realize that the heat of the American dream is being fueled by the systematic burnout of these domestic engineers. They are the ones who turn the raw, violent energy of the city into something resembling a life. Their labor is the invisible foundation upon which the entire iron grid rests. You feel a sense of profound reverence for this struggle, a recognition of the grit required to maintain dignity in a world that treats people as interchangeable parts. The ledger may show a balance of pennies, but the human cost is immeasurable. The grain of their lives is rough and full of knots, but it is held together by a strength that no machine can replicate. This is the domestic reality of the builders of America, a story of bread, lumber, and the silent, iron-willed women who ensured that despite the crushing weight of the city, the hearth remained lit. Take a moment to leave a like on this video if you feel the weight of these forgotten stories, because every thumb up is a tribute to the invisible hands that built the foundations of our modern world and kept the fire burning through the darkest nights of the industrial storm. You are now an observer of the most vital architecture of all, the structure of human resilience within the walls of a home that the world tried to turn into a mere barracks. The light flickers, the soot settles, but the spirit of the hearth hardens, a stubborn ember in the vast cold machinery of the 19th century. Your journey through these layers of existence is revealing the true cost of the skyline, and the next step will take you even deeper into the belly of the transformation, where the man and the machine become indistinguishably entwined. You step out of the domestic shadows and into the blinding, percussive roar of the mechanized furniture factory, a place where the very definition of a human being is being recalibrated by the geometry of the gear. The air here is no longer a localized scent. It is a violent atmospheric assault of pressurized steam, vaporized whale oil, and a dust so fine it coats your throat like liquid lead. You feel the floorboards beneath your boots screaming in a continuous, high-frequency vibration that numbs your nerves from the heels up. This is the belly of the beast, the final destiny of the American timber that you once saw being handled with individual reverence. Here the wood is not a partner. It is an enemy to be conquered by speed. You watch the carpenter who once decided the fate of every plank with a contemplative stroke of his thumb, now standing at a fixed station. He is tethered to the rhythm of a leather belt that snakes through the ceiling, connecting his hands to a central, unseen engine of immense power. The mastery he spent 20 years cultivating has been dissected and redistributed among a dozen different machines. He no longer builds a chair. He spends 12 hours a day perfecting the identical curvature of 1,000 left legs. You see the loss of autonomy in the glazed, rhythmic focus of his eyes. He is no longer a creator. He is a ghost inhabiting a machine. The stability of the craft has been replaced by the terrifying efficiency of the assembly line. You feel the pressure of the quota, a heavy, invisible weight that dictates every blink and every breath. There is no room for the structural honesty of the old ways when the ledger demands 10,000 units by Saturday. You observe the physical toll of this systemic shift in the way the men move, stiff, repetitive movements that turn the body into a biological extension of the iron piston. The risk here is no longer a matter of skill, but a matter of mathematical probability. You look at the circular saw, spinning at a speed that makes the blade appear as a translucent, shimmering halo of death. There are no guards, no emergency stops, no safety nets. You see a man 3 stations down slip on a patch of oil, and in the time it takes for a heart to beat once, the machine has claimed its tribute. The sound of the accident is swallowed instantly by the roar of the factory. There is no pause. The belt keeps moving, the quota remains. You feel a cold, hollow dread in your stomach as you realize that in this era, a broken hand is a death sentence for a family. Without the ability to serve the machine, the man is discarded as easily as a snapped splinter of pine. There is no insurance, no compensation, no mercy from the board of directors. You are witnessing the absolute fragility of the human component in an age of steel. The contrast between the immense wealth being generated by these machines and the utter disposability of the men operating them is a structural failure that defines the century. You watch the foreman walk past the injured man without breaking stride, his eyes fixed on the output monitor. The individual is gone. Only the aggregate remains. You feel the heat of the boiler room pulsing through the walls, a reminder that this entire civilization is being propelled forward by the systematic consumption of human vitality. The craftsmanship that once provided a sense of pride and social standing has been hollowed out, leaving behind a shell of industrial labor. You realize that the ghost in the machine is the spirit of the craftsman himself, trapped in a loop of meaningless high-speed repetition. The transition from the workshop to the factory is not just a change in location, it is a fundamental rupture in the human experience of work. You see the carpenter wipe the sweat and grease from his forehead, his hands shaking slightly as he tries to keep pace with the relentless leather belt. He is fighting a war he cannot win, a war against a machine that never tires, never hungers, and never feels the ache of a swollen joint. The sensory overload of the factory, the screaming saws, the hissing steam, the acrid smoke, is a form of environmental violence that rewrites the nervous system. You feel the density of this atmosphere pressing against your chest, making it difficult to draw a clean breath. This is the industrial reality, a world of soaring productivity built upon a foundation of profound human alienation. The structures are more complex than ever, but the men who build them are becoming simpler, reduced to a single function, a single motion, a single cog in a global mechanism. You watch the sun go down through the high, grime-filled windows, but the lights in the factory do not dim. The machine does not recognize the cycle of day and night. It only acknowledges the flow of capital and the depletion of raw material. You are standing at the center of a transformation that will eventually spark revolutions and birth the labor movements of the future. But for now, there is only the noise. The sheer scale of the operation is awe-inspiring and horrifying in equal measure. You realize that the American dream is being forged in this fire. But the cost of the fuel is the very autonomy that once defined the American character. Share this video with someone who values the history of hard work, because understanding the struggle of the men who became cogs is the only way to truly appreciate the freedoms and protections we often take for granted in our own time. The machine continues to thrum, the saws continue to scream, and the ghost of the craftsman continues to labor in the heart of the industrial storm, a silent witness to the birth of a world that has no place for the slow, deliberate touch of a master's hand. You feel the vibration of the floorboards one last time before you turn away, knowing that the man you are watching is the last of a breed, a survivor of a lost world trying to find his footing in a landscape of iron and fire. The next chapter of our journey will take us beyond the factory walls to find what remains of this legacy in the modern world. But the sound of that spinning blade will stay with you long after you leave this place. The machine is hungry, and the day is far from over. You step out of the deafening roar of the 19th century and back into the temperate silence of the present. Yet as you look around the modern American landscape, you realize that the Industrial Revolution never truly ended. It simply solidified into the very bones of the world you inhabit. Do you see the ghost of the carpenter in the straight lines of the suburban street? Can you feel the vibration of the old steam engines beneath the quiet hum of your digital devices? Is the dignity of a hand-planed surface lost forever, or has it merely migrated into the collective memory of a nation that prides itself on grit? What remains of the man who gave his lungs to the sawdust and his fingers to the spinning blade? Have we finally traded the soul of the maker for the convenience of the mass-produced, or is there a part of us that still yearns for the structural honesty of the original craft? You walk through a modern city park, and your eyes are drawn to the weathered brick of a converted warehouse. You reach out and touch the wall, feeling the uneven texture of clay fired over a century ago. This is the material residue of the labor you witnessed. You notice the timber beams visible through the expansive glass windows of a high-end loft, thick, dark pillars of virgin pine that once held the weight of heavy machinery and the hopes of 1,000 immigrant families. These beams are no longer mere structural members. They have been elevated to symbols of authenticity in an increasingly synthetic world. You feel the cool density of the wood, a substance that has outlived the men who felled it and the craftsmen who squared it. The stability of these materials provides a grounding contrast to the fleeting digital nature of contemporary life. You realize that the American identity is inextricably knotted into this history of manual endurance. The carpenter, the smith, and the factory hand were the architects of a national character, defined by the ability to transform a raw, violent wilderness into an organized industrial powerhouse. This grit is not just a historical footnote, it is a philosophical synthesis of the American experience. You see it in the way we still romanticize the handmade, seeking out the imperfections of the artisanal as a rebellion against the sterile perfection of the machine. The loss of autonomy you witnessed in the factory has given birth to a deep cultural nostalgia for the workshop. You feel the weight of this legacy as you observe the modern obsession with heritage and craft. We are trying to reclaim the connection between the hand and the brain that was severed on the assembly line. The contrast between the abundance of our current age and the scarcity of the laborer's tenement is stark, yet we find ourselves searching for the very thing they were forced to abandon, a sense of individual purpose within the act of creation. The risk of the industrial era has been replaced by a different kind of fragility, a spiritual thinness that comes from being too far removed from the physical foundations of our existence. You understand now that the Industrial Revolution was a necessary tragedy, a brutal sharpening of the human spirit that allowed for the birth of the modern world while sacrificing the intimacy of the old. The structures of survival have evolved into the structures of prosperity, but the grain of memory remains rough and deep. You look at your own hands and wonder what you are building that will last as long as a hand-carved joinery. The lesson of the craftsman is one of structural integrity, not just in buildings but in the self. As you stand in the shadow of a skyscraper that owes its existence to the men who first mastered the iron grid, you feel a profound sense of continuity. The American city is a palimpsest, a parchment where the sweat of the 19th century is still visible beneath the neon of the 21st. The elevator of history has taken us to heights the master carpenter could never have imagined, but the foundation is still made of the pine and iron he laid down in the mud. This is the final revelation. We are the inheritors of a world built by those who were consumed by its construction. Their sacrifice is the silent mortar between every brick of our reality. We owe them more than curiosity. We owe them a recognition of the humanity they maintained, despite being treated as parts of a machine. The story of the American craftsman is the story of the struggle to remain human in a world that values the product more than the producer. It is a story of family, of bread, of steam, and of a stubborn, quiet defiance that lives on in every grain of wood and every beam of steel. You turn away from the old warehouse, feeling the air of the present day with a new clarity. The journey through the layers of the industrial past has not just been a tour of history, but a descent into the marrow of what it means to work and to live. You are the witness to their endurance, and in your memory their tools are still sharp, their hearts are still warm, and their labor is finally honored. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel, because understanding the physical cost of our history is the only way to navigate the complexities of our future with wisdom and empathy. If you've watched this far, it's because you liked this case. Leave a comment saying, "I've watched this far so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel." Please like this video to help keep these vital historical narratives alive, and share it with those who believe that the soul of a nation is found in the hands of its people. The sun sets on the modern skyline, but the shadows it casts are long, reaching back to the workshops and the tenements, reminding us that every upward step was paid for in the currency of human grit. Would you like me to generate a cinematic cover image for this documentary script?